Well, happy Friday, everyone out there in nonprofit land. I'm so glad to see you here this afternoon or later in your life if you're watching this recorded and not live. If it's 12:30 Eastern Time on Friday afternoon, you know it's accidental techie time. With me, my name is Maureen Walbioff. I'm a nonprofit digital strategist and technology coach, and I help nonprofits make really smart decisions about their technology. And that includes their fundraising system, all the data in it, and the ways that they use that stuff to engage their supporters and raise more money and awareness for their work. So every Friday we do this, and I could not be happier. If you could have been in the green room with Dawn and I a minute ago, we were already deep into this topic. I'm so excited to be joined by the awesome Dawn Galasso from Pursuant to talk about mid-level donors and how to get a little smarter and a little more strategic about how you manage and steward this really important segment of your supporter audience. Dawn, thank you so much for joining me this afternoon.
Thanks, Maureen. I'm super excited to join. This is one of my many favorite topics to talk about. And I know we can get pretty geeky in our conversation, but I'm kind of excited to dig into it a little bit. So just to kind of give a little bit of background on me, I've been in data analytics for a decade now. So I've worked at Wealth Engine, I worked at iWave, and really what I specialize in and do is bring good technology to nonprofits. And so I joined Pursuant last summer because they built a new platform called Giving DNA that allows our clients to kind of democratize data and not just look at data from a pure, I've got a spreadsheet and this is data analytics and what do I do next, but actually be able to see the stories in the data. So kind of think Tableau sits in the middle of your data and your CRM, and that's what Giving DNA does.
It's such a missing thing. I think that nonprofits generally collect so much information that it turns into a hoarding situation, and then you don't know what to use and how to use it. So as an industry, we've got step one down, which is gather it. Right. And, this is the place where the promise of your technology and the promise of all your data can be fulfilled. Yeah. Even, through small ways. So let's really dig into it. And the first question might be real basic, but it's different for everybody. How is a mid-level donor defined? Does it vary from org to org? How should folks be thinking about this segment of their audience?
Yeah, so the mid-level is defined differently at every organization. We typically say it's between about $1,000 and $10,000. That is your traditional kind of average across large and small organizations. Mm-hmm. But we have small nonprofits that they say, hey, if I get $5,000, that's a major gift. Mm-hmm. So for them, their mid-level gift may be at $500 mm-hmm. or $250 may even be that mid-level gift. But basically, it's around how you're raising money, and then there's actually a formula that you use. You take what your average gift size is, and you're supposed to. We actually in our ebook, and I know you're going to pop that in later. We give the formula for that, but it's what your average gift size is times 3 times 12, and that's how you get to what your mid-level gift should be.
I love math. I mean, I don't love math, but I love formulas because it is going to vary. If your organization's annual revenue is under $1 million, your mid-level donor top and bottom is going to look very different than somebody who's a $35 million organization. Right. That's exactly just how it is. So once you've defined this, what should fundraisers be thinking about, or why is it so puzzling for many of us to know, other than, hoping they continue to give? How should we be thinking about this group? Why is it so important?
Yeah, I think you cannot ignore mid-level donors for a lot of different reasons. The first one is that most of your major donors are in your mid-level donor pool right now. And how do they become major donors? By feeling that you get them and that you're personalizing the message to them and that you're creating a relationship with them. One of the challenges around mid-level is that typically if you have mid-level gift officers, they've got much larger portfolios. And a lot of people don't even have mid-level gift officers. They just got like a mid-level program.
Right.
And what happens a lot of times, and we hear about this a lot, is that you've got your annual donors who receive typically, frequent emails or direct mail pieces, right? So maybe quarterly, they're always getting something. And you've got your major gift prospects that are getting personalized touches. And then you've got this mid-level program and they don't get anything. They almost get ignored because they're not in the annual appeal and they're not in this other level. So you have to kind of really focus on this group. But this group is expecting to be focused on at a personal level, especially if they're writing, a $5,000 gift or a $3,000 gift. A lot of those individuals, that's a big gift for them. And their expectation is that they're going to build a personalized relationship with you as an organization, but can you as an organization build a personalized relationship with them? And how do you do that? And that's kind of the thing you have to think through as you create and sustain a mid-level program.
Does it help to have a person within the fundraising team or the development team who focuses on this segment? Because you probably see what I do, which is, we've got major donors, solicitors, or it's the executive director and the VP of fundraising. Then you've got the monthly donor program, and you're spending a lot of time thinking about those people, getting them to renew, making sure they don't lapse, maybe upselling them for an additional gift. And some organizations also have like an annual giving program that they spend a lot of time on as well. Do you think that the action of having a person oversee this is the first step, or is that not necessary in your experience?
I think if you have the bandwidth, you should have somebody, just like those other programs. Your mid-level program is fueling planned and giving prospects. It's fueling your major gift prospects. So if you have the ability to have somebody, a lot of times with smaller organizations, they're wearing multiple different hats, right? And so what I would suggest, and I know you're very much like this as well, Maureen, I'm very process driven, which means that to me, it's less about having a person and more about having a process. Like, how are we going to accomplish this? How do we build a process that we can continue, that's sustainable, right? So it needs to be simple enough that you can do whatever that process is within the time frame that you need to be doing it for these donors, and keep that process in place, and just make sure that you're consistent with it. Because I think what happens a lot of times is people don't put the process in place. They have the idea of what they want to do. They might put a person there, but then they don't have okay, what is it that we're going to do every month or every quarter? How much can we do? If you tell one person who's managing a mid-level team, okay, you need to touch every one of these mid-level donors once a month, the reality is that, okay, how do you accomplish that? If that's unattainable, we need to make sure that we set realistic expectations, and then we're consistent with the follow through on them.
I love everything that you just said, because what I find, especially when people are trying to use data and technology to power some of this stewardship, special messages, little extra personalization in the email, whatever it is, people think it's the Taj Mahal or nothing.
Right.
And I wonder what advice you would give for folks who might have big aspirations that are not attainable today. And then they just sort of stop in their tracks and say, if I can't get the whole Megillah, I'm not going to do anything. What advice would you have for those folks? Because there's a million of them out there.
Yeah. So I'm going to take a step back real quick and just talk about the whole idea of personalization and why it's so important right now. Yeah. And then how you can take little steps like walk, jog, run versus, okay, I want to run a marathon and I'm just going to sign up and run a marathon tomorrow. It doesn't work that way. We all know it doesn't, even though we kind of, we've got board members or executive directors. A lot of times we say, yeah, it can. We just know that it can. So, our donors in every other aspect of their life, you and me included, we're having hyper personalized relationships with everybody we purchase from and everything. I love to use the CVS example. I've been selling data forever. And I used to go into CVS and they'd say, get the CVS card. And I'd say, no, I don't want it because you're going to take my data, and I know what you do with data because I sell it. And then one day I went in and they were selling my shampoo, and I would get like $3 off or $5 off if I used a card, and I'm cheap. So I was like, okay, well, $5, you can
It
have
was
all
the exchange rate tipped for
my,
you.
exactly. And but they were brilliant. They actually, to the point, they actually have, if you Google, you can see the CVS customer journey. And basically from the time you sign up for a card, they have a whole system in place of what they're going to do. So what they do is super smart, because now they send me coupons, and I buy my lip gloss and my mascara at CVS and my vitamins. They send me coupons about the things that I buy. So I open every single email they send me. I have sales from all over the place coming every morning. I have to delete, like I call them swipe left, right? I swipe left on like 20 different stores that are sending me, because they send me the same, there's a sale every day, basically.
Right.
CVS, I open every single day. Our donors need to, we need to be sending them things that are relevant to them. So they're opening our emails. So they're opening our direct mails. Amazon has forced this change. I went to the Marriott the other day. I was traveling for a conference. I got into my room and it said, "Hi, Dawn, welcome back." And I was like, oh, they know I'm here. You know what I mean? So this whole level of personalization is, our donors are expecting that with anybody that they're building relationships with, especially if they're giving money to you. They're writing you check to support your mission. They need to feel understood. So having said that, you might have a lot of data, you might not have any data at all, but how can you kind of start to accomplish this? My suggestion number one is that you can do the very first thing, which is make sure you're doing your salutations correctly when you're sending them out. I was on a call the other day, and this exact same thing happened, where it was a larger church. They decided that they were not going to send out anything with Mr. and Mrs. anymore, because it was a young development communications person who said, "Hey, that's old school. No one says Mr. or Mrs. anymore." They didn't know the age of their file, or the people, they didn't have an age on their individuals.
Yeah.
So they just sent it out with just, "Hey, Joan." And I use my mom's name. She's 81. If she gets something with her first name on it, she's like, "You are being way too informal with me. You don't know me well enough to not call me by my Mrs." Right. And so off a bunch of the people in their file. Now, some of the people were probably super happy about it. They're like, "What? Thank you. You're not calling me Mr. or Mrs. anymore." But to know the age of your file, and then to correctly talk to them, that in and of itself makes them feel understood and heard. The other example, Maureen, was I have a colleague who is younger, and she was supporting an organization that's a veterans. They help wounded veterans, and they sent her an end of the year appeal last year. And this is how much it meant to her, that it kind of bothered her, is that, she is very patriotic. She loves her country, but they sent her something that said, "Hey, dear Patriot." But for her generation, patriot sometimes means, the connotation is a little bit different than it would be if my mom was, right? And so just understanding and making those slight adjustments. If you have an audience that is not, English is not their first language. We had a hospital that they were sending out stuff to their Hispanic group, and they thought their Hispanic population didn't give, because for years they had never gotten a gift from them. They ended up hiring somebody who was Hispanic, went and read through all of their stuff that they were sending, and was like, "The reason why you're not getting any gifts is because no one read through here and corrected." It was like someone who wasn't Spanish as their first language had written it. And so they didn't understand the nuances of it. The minute that they made the changes, all of a sudden, this group of people that they started to ignore because they thought they weren't givers, became very philanthropic. In fact, increased like 20% more than any other group in that given year, just changing that. So I think if nothing else, just understanding things like that can make a huge difference. And then, of course, obviously, segmenting on interests and those things would be secondary.
Building the relationship. Sometimes I'll say it that effusive thanks and recognition is what we all are looking for. And I think people, nonprofit fundraisers, often feel like I can only do that personally, Like, I have to be talking to you. I have to be writing you a personal email. That's no longer true.
And there's great technology out there that can help with that. When you think about it, when I log into Amazon, there's not a person saying, "Hey, Dawn Galasso logged into Amazon. Let's
Your
pull up
shoes
her
are on
list."
sale. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Let's pull up the list of things she likes and feed her more of that. They've got it automated through artificial intelligence. There's great technology out there that the nonprofit world over the past 5 years that has been created that can help supplement that, where you could be literally talking to thousands of people, where you build an email or a sequence of conversations you want to have. And it can feel very personal, and it's automated. So, you can't send 1,000 emails out in a week, but you can automate processes where you can.
Where a little bit of personalization, cat person, dog person, like basic stuff like that makes a huge difference. What the term donor journey is used all day long in our circles. What's the right journey for a mid-level donor? And you can think about it from like the simple, like what's the basic thing? Because I think that unless there's signs through wealth screening or something like that, that you're going to move them to become a major donor, I think, again, this mid-level donor group is mysterious, and folks don't know, other than keeping them giving year after year, what else can I try to get them to do, or how can I move them closer to my organization? What are your thoughts and tips about that?
I think one of the most underused things that people can do, and it's really simple, is send them surveys, ask them questions. And that does not have to be personalized on the outreach other than a salutation or something like that. But ask them, why did you give to us the first time? What was the reason why you gave? A lot of times people just want to be heard, and we're so busy doing outreach that we're not listening when it comes to, you know what I mean? And that actually can help inform what you're doing for other outreach and communications as well. If you're hearing the same thing over and over again, this is the reason why, this is the thing that I saw that made me want to write that first check. And so I think that surveys are a great way to listen. An example that I was, at that same one when it was the Mr. and Mrs. we talked about, was somebody said, well, what happens if you don't know? What happens if you take off the Mr. and Mrs. because they're younger and they are offended, or you add it to an older person and they are offended? And I was like, I would put something in my email at the bottom saying, we know that people's preferences are different, and we do not want to ignore the fact that your preference may not be what we thought it was. Would you please respond and let us know how you would like to be, if we're not using the right pronoun, if we're not using the right salutation, so that we can make sure we build that relationship with you. And that in and of itself is asking for forgiveness if you did it wrong, but also learning something from them, right? And so I think that's a big deal. I do think that if you can, you should get some type of data on individuals about the things that they're interested in supporting. And a lot of times organizations aren't just raising money for one thing, they're raising money for multiple different things. I went and looked at somebody, it was an animal rights group, and on their website it says we raise money for animal rights, and we are and basically green living, you know what I mean, like outdoor space and stuff like that. And a lot of zoos are doing that now, where they're supporting the rainforest and stuff like that. And so, food banks aren't just raising money for food. They're a social services organization, but they also are helping kids get nutritious meals so that they have education equity, versus not having a full belly and not being able to learn appropriately, which reinforces that inequity in education that sometimes we don't even think of. Well, if your donors are interested in education, talk to them about how food, not having nutritious food, contributes to the education inequity. Or if you know that person's interested in healthcare, talk to them about how you feed a lot of the older people in your county or city that otherwise would be having long-term health issues because they're not getting nutritious meals. And so, being engaging in that way, I think can be super helpful. And again, it just leads them more down the road of what they already kind of meeting your donor where they are in their donor journey and not where you are in their donor journey.
Right. You are not your donor. Remember hearing that? Maybe like 5 or 6 years ago, every day, you're not your donor. I think that the other tip I'll layer on that for folks is this does not and should not be the most comprehensive survey you will ever send to anybody. I'm talking 3 questions, just 3. And then maybe next quarter, you send them another survey with 3 other questions so that over time, you're building out a better picture of who these folks are and what they're interested in. And then you're using that data to give them a better experience instead of just collecting it and knowing it. You got to do something with that data. Otherwise, people will start to flake away and not necessarily fill out your surveys because you're not really using that information to benefit my relationship with
Maureen,
you.
that is so spot on because if you collect information and they say, do call me Mr. or do call me Mrs., and you do not do that, or somebody else at your organization doesn't do that after they have boldly given you that information, you've got a problem. So and I think that the easy way to do this and build trust that you're using the data wisely so that they'll continue to do those surveys is make sure the first one's just, do you want to be Mr. or Mrs.? What communication preferences do you have? Would you rather receive emails or a direct mail piece, or would you like to pick up the phone and chat with us? Let them give you those 2 things and then make sure you do them. And then when the next survey comes, they'll say, oh, well, they're using the information I gave them in a way that I am very comfortable with. Let me give them a little bit more so I can make my experience even better.
Are there ways, technically, I'm curious, ways that you'd recommend that data gets collected? I know that most folks don't have a survey tool that's connected to their fundraising database, right? So do you have any tips for easy ways for folks to collect that data and then be able to map it back to that particular supporter?
Yeah, I mean, you can do a lot of wealth screening and data overlays will be able to provide that for you. And it's mapped back to the constituent ID. Now, if you're doing a survey, it's going to be potentially a little bit more manual when it comes to that. But typically what we see is like they will tie it to the constituent ID, and then within Razor's Edge or Salesforce, whatever the CRM, they're going to build tags or attributes, right? So so that now I get out everyone who said they want to be emailed. I can query on that first. They've identified that they want to be emailed. Make sure we email them. These people want to use a salutation. These people do not want to use a salutation. I think those are probably the easiest because when you think about it, you need to be able to get the data back out of the CRM. And so what we hear a lot of times is that especially organizations that have been around for a while and they've had multiple different people that have worked in the same position. One person built out an attribute, and I'll just give you an example. One person, I had an organization years ago that was kind of like a Dress for Success organization. So they were always trying to track people's job titles because it helped them with getting their people jobs and stuff like that. Well, one person did Doctor, DOCTOR, and then somebody else did a DR, and then somebody else did an MD. And then we were like, okay, why don't you build a drop down where they're forced to select one word, because otherwise they were like, we can't get this data out. So that's something you always have to think of also is before you put it in, how are we going to query it back out again so that we make sure we force it in a way that we can use this data effectively?
Yes, 1,000 times yes, because that's another place that stops nonprofit teams is they know salutation, cat or dog, birth date, whatever it is, but it's a pain in the neck to try to get that information back in. And then if you've got a separate email tool, it's a whole other ball of wax. So that's why starting small and getting it right and practicing and learning, having a learning stance about this,
Yep.
and then growing it, just like you would do with a sustainer program. We don't have one. We're going to add it to our donation form. We're going to start to message around it. We're going to monitor, and then we know what other bells and whistles we might want to slap into that program to
Right.
keep people giving. Credit card updater, for example, things like that. Is there anything, as you've done all of this resource collection and thinking and guidance for folks, that has surprised you about the mid-level group? Is there anything that's changing about them? Has the pandemic or anything else that's we've all experienced over the past couple of years influenced your guidance for clients who are trying to do a better job with
Well,
mid-level?
I think the whole thing of we need to do a better job is probably the biggest takeaway.
Right.
One of the things that we found is that through COVID, the mid-level donors were really sustained a lot of the organizations. And so that group stepped up a lot. And so, it reinforced that this group cannot be ignored, that we have to kind of figure out a way to focus on this group with whatever bandwidth we have, because they are a group that rises to the occasion when we need them to. That, when you think about the transfer of wealth going on over the next 20 some years, your mid-level donors are that transfer of wealth. A lot of them are that transfer of wealth, or if nothing else, they actually are. And I think about this in my own life. My parents are in their 80s.
Mm-hmm.
I'm helping them with their resources and what to do with their resources and where they should be putting their planned gifts and stuff like that. So when you think about these things, this is why we can't ignore this group, because even if they're giving us $1,000 a year, this group potentially inherits money, and if they're consistent givers, and they're also being influencers to their parents and that generation that is making planned gift decisions and stuff, and major gift decisions. So there's a lot of different reasons why it just can't be ignored, where we used to just kind of sustain it and just be like, just make sure you get that gift again, where we really need to start cultivating those relationships, because if we don't, somebody else is. Because most donors are giving to multiple organizations. They're not just if they're giving you $1,000, they're probably giving at least 4 other places $1,000 each. So where those bigger gifts are going to go is to where the person that organization has figured out how to build a better relationship with them.
It's so true. And the way that you just laid this out is such a great visual in my mind of our donors are aging out. What are we going to do about that? My file is really old. And the mid-level donors are also influencing the next generation of givers, right?
Yeah.
So it extends, it's the sandwich generation.
On both sides, right? It really is. My daughter, she's married, 2 kids. She's looking at what my husband and I do and seeing what things make sense to her. Yep. She may question some and choose others, but she's still looking to us for those, at least, suggestions.
You and I could talk all day about this, and amazingly, we've only got a minute or 2 left. So what else, Dawn, if people leave this little live session today with 3 things that you want them to carry back to their team, what would those 3 things be?
The first thing would be, if you haven't focused on mid-level, a lot of times people have an annual and then they have a major because of bandwidth and they don't have anything in between. The first thing I would say is you guys need to start talking about what are we doing for the in-betweens, because the in-betweens is the group that we've been talking about this whole time, right? Yep. So I would think that would be the first thing. The second thing is once you've decided if you have a mid-level program, you've decided, we do need to focus on the in-betweens, which you should. You need to think about what is the donor experience going to look like? What would I expect that donor experience to look like? Do I want to get an email? Do I want to then get a phone call a week later? Do I want to get a resource? Do I want to what seems like it makes sense? And can I do that in a way that's sustainable? And then if you can't sustain it, if you're like, I can't make all of those phone calls, then pare it back, but do something. To your point, don't just do all or nothing, at least do something. Something might make the difference in your fundraising for the year or next year. And then all of a sudden you have extra revenue to hire somebody else to manage it in a little bit of a better way.
You know the life of a nonprofit. When you're like, we need another body in here, the tech can't do it all.
Yeah.
Dawn, I have learned like 6 new things in this 30 minutes, just from your perspective. I think it's about try, start, keep it small, manageable, but don't ignore it. You're going to ignore this group at your peril. Go in with, I want to learn more about what I can do. Start there. Yep. And then start small. You might want to just segment off a little bit of, let's say, a giving day that you might have coming up. End of year. Yeah. You might spin up a slightly different way of telling your stories and different levels on the donation form, perhaps, for this mid-level crew. So there are a lot of things that are in your power now. You just need to spend the luxury of some planning time and then rolling some things out. Dawn,
sometimes it's hard to get that time, but it's very important.
You can't not do it. We're telling you today, at your peril. So Dawn, it has been so wonderful to spend 30 minutes with you. Thank you so much. I've popped in a whole bunch of resources from Pursuant for mid-level giving. You've got a masterclass, you've got eBooks, you've got all kinds of things. Please take advantage of these resources because they're awesome. I've downloaded them all and I have been very, very glad to go through all of them. So thanks, everybody. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, a nice long weekend, and I will see you back here next Friday at 12:30 for another conversation. Dawn, what a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Sherry.
See y'all soon. Bye, folks.